Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Sumner, registered dietitian, focusing on helping men and women end binge eating, end food guilt, and finally say yes to life. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not substitute for medical and personalized advice. Hi guys, welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast, and in this episode, we'll be talking about the festive season and how to navigate your way through this period. For some people who might be wondering, Jonathan, why would the festive period or Christmas be a time of worry for people struggling with binge eating? If you personally struggle with disordered eating habits, you might very well know the feeling of worry and anxiety around this Christmas season. The reason why the Christmas season is so stressful for people struggling with disordered eating habits or eating disorders is because the Christmas season heavily revolves around food and comments about weight. People start to buy chocolate, advent calendars, and have a piece of chocolate every morning. On the way to Christmas Day, hot chocolates are filled with whipped cream and flakes, which are almost a daily norm. Mince pies and cookies are everywhere you look. Fruitcakes with double cream are heavily stocked on market shelves. And when you're struggling with binge eating, it's easy to follow or chase weight loss as much as possible. But Christmas period can be a season which you might feel, or you might be finding your goals being sabotaged. I want you to think about Christmas food. What kind of foods pop into your mind? I want you to have a moment to think about which foods you're thinking about right now. Do they spark any anxiety or nervousness? Do they even spark any worry? Maybe feelings of anger? Are there any of the foods in your mind which could be your trigger foods to your binge eating? When we struggle with disordered eating habits, it's not just Christmas period which can spark anxiety. But what comes next might cause even more anxiety, especially if you're on the path to recovery. And what I'm talking about here is New Year's Day, or the New Year's period. Whilst it's great to celebrate a fun New Year's period, everywhere you go, you see New Year, New Me trends, massive rise in dieting products such as detox drinks, weight loss pills, and massive news articles about the latest fad diet trend. But that's probably for another episode in the future. And in this episode, we'll talk about the 3 ways you can prevent binge eating urges, especially when you're struggling with binge eating this Christmas period. So, to get straight to the point, the number one thing you can do to prevent binge urges this Christmas is to eat regular meals and snacks. Yes, even if you had a massive meal the night before, whether it's from your Christmas party, even if you had a binge the night before, or even if you had nothing, make sure you eat regular meals and snacks because these are very protective against binge eating episodes. One of the main reasons we struggle with binge eating urges is because our body's crying out for food. It's probably heavily craving for physical comfort or mental comfort, which we're trying to avoid by dieting. So let's talk about physical restriction and where that can pop up. If you're struggling with binge eating this Christmas period, I want you to think and ask yourself, when was the last time you had 3 meals a day? Which could be your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Maybe you did have 3 meals a day for a while, but have you had it consistently for the past few weeks? Were your meals filling and satisfying? Remember that filling and satisfying are 2 different things. Whilst it might seem that Christmas period is a very anxious time for people struggling with binge eating, because there's so much freedom of snacks being available in the day and the evening, it can be so scary, and it could be even a great exercise to practice staying comfortably full if we look at it on the good side. Since there's lots of availability of snacks, there's probably less judgment than we think there are. So it's a good exercise to have or try these little trigger foods if they might be trigger foods, and to experience what it's like to be comfortably full throughout the day. And make sure I'm clearly making the difference that we need to be comfortably full, not sick full, where we're stuffing ourselves too much. And I understand and really empathize that Christmas is a time of worry because there's so much focus on high energy foods. But let's remember that foods, they're just not simply food. They often come with nostalgic memories. They can help improve our mental health. Food can often be used to bond people closer together. Hence, Christmas period is a time of togetherness. And food is used to guide people to strengthen relationships for getting through the year. So this season, try to make sure you're eating regular meals and snacks, even if you binge recently. The number 2 way to prevent binges this Christmas season is to get rid of the mindset of good or bad foods. When we think of Christmas, what are some good foods that might pop into your mind? What are some foods you might consider to be bad? Well, there are no good or bad foods. If you've been following me for a while in this podcast, there's no such thing as good or bad foods. Food is simply food, and the only bad food you should be concerned about, really, are the ones that are expired or out of date. Food isn't just about how much nutrients they can provide to us. We often, as a society, forget about the experience and improvements food can simply provide to our mental health, especially during the season when it's dark. The sun is not shining as often. We're all at a high risk of this thing called SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder, which is why we often feel low in mood during this Christmas season. I wouldn't be surprised if that might be contributed by dieting and judgment around people's food choices this Christmas season. And sometimes having that chocolate, even if it's just that one little piece of chocolate, can provide us some relief and comfort during this dark time. So why else would you want to get rid of the good or bad mindset this Christmas period? Well, when we eat good foods, we might be associated with good, which is all right. But the second you eat a food that you might consider as bad, then that's when our mindset starts to fall apart. We start to associate ourselves as bad, and we get this intense urge to feel guilty and shameful for what we've done. Is this feeling a bit relatable for you? You might feel an intense urge to just ignore your current strict diet because you've just tasted how delicious that bad food is, and now you can't stop, so you might as well just eat the whole thing. Once we change our mindset from good and bad to everything as neutral and all foods fit into our diet, then that's when our body image, our self-esteem, our relationship around food dramatically improves. I understand this can be a scary concept because everywhere you go, diet culture tells us that this food is good and this food is bad. But let's break through this mold. Just because something is common doesn't mean it's correct. Here's a good analogy. In the 1900s, cigarettes were seen as good and beneficial to your health, and people during the industrial era were turning from non-smokers to smokers just to get the proposed benefits out of it. But nowadays, cigarettes are seen as bad for our health. In the late 1900s also, fats and carbs were seen as bad for our health, wherein people would demonize and avoid carbohydrates as if it was a plague. In the current time now, well, we're still working on it, carbohydrates have been shown to improve our mental health, provide us more energy, and healthy monounsaturated fats, which were seen to improve our hormonal health and mental health, have started to crop up in the research. When we have the mindset of good or bad, we really tend to do pretty extreme things. So remember, no food is good and no food is bad. Let's avoid adding morality to food. The number 3 and final tip to navigate Christmas period when you struggle with binge eating is to make sure to be kind to yourself. I know it sounds very simple, but when was the last time you were kind and gave yourself self-care, especially after a binge? You might have went for a binge and the easiest impulse is to promise yourself to not eat the next day or to just try to go to bed as fast as possible, to sleep past that guilt. Because I've been there, and I don't know if you've been there, but after a binge, it's one of the most vulnerable and sensitive times to feeling bad or beating yourself up. Instead, we can try to learn from this binge. We could just move on and know that we should be grateful that we provided some nourishment to our body and move on. We can think to ourselves, okay, that just happened. And I know I cannot change the past. But what I can do is to continue to nourish my body by giving it what it needs, which is love and attention. We tend to wallow in embarrassment, shame, and guilt after a binge. But take it as a self-care and a learning opportunity. You can try to have a relaxing bath, read a nice book that you enjoy, put your favorite TV show on, whatever makes you happy, so you get ready for the next day to not have intense and impulsive decisions to diet harder. After the binge, also, reflect and think to yourself, what has led me to have these intense binge cravings? Was it because I didn't eat enough throughout the day? Was there an emotion that was being held in for so long? Was there a food that I really wanted to have, but I simply ignored that craving for so long? It's really important to be mindful and reflective post-binge and find out what caused the binge, because being reflective and having much more mindfulness after a binge is a really powerful tool to prevent further binges in the future. So I'm just going to leave it there. This Christmas season, I really, really empathize and I understand that it is a difficult season to go through when you struggle with the disordered eating habits. But if anything, provide yourself the self-care and the self-compassion this festive season. Provide your body what it needs, and most of the time, it might look like giving yourself food, nourishing your body regularly, and providing self-care, especially after a binge. And surprisingly enough, you might soon find yourself enjoying these little Christmas snacks, or even the New Year's later on, with a little bit less guilt each time until you tend to wash away all the guilt. I'm going to link the eating disorder charity called Beat in the link in the description of the podcast for some helplines over Christmas, online support groups, and carer workshops if you're a carer. So have a lovely Christmas period, and thank you for listening. Bye! If you found this podcast helpful, you would definitely benefit from my binge eating freedom course in my website, bingedietitian.com. Learn more about the triggers to why you're binge eating and how to stop binge eating for good. No more food guilt, no more jumping from diet to diet, and no more shame. Go to the link in this episode for my binge eating freedom course to be one step closer to being binge free, starting today.